Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back in Miami. I, this is like my second home. There's so many faces I see in the audience, and I can't tell you how proud I am of the Health Foundation of South Florida. The growth it has made in this space is incredible, and I couldn't come here, sit on this stage, and not acknowledge the tremendous work that they're doing. I hope that everyone in this room really can understand the value that they are adding to the community and the hard work that they're doing. Please, yes, definitely recognize what they are doing. So they brought me here to do a fireside chat of sorts with Dr. Wisdom Powell. And I'm assuming at some point she will pop up on the screen. There she is. All right, there we go. So Dr. Powell, and if you will bear with me, I have to do this very lengthy introduction of you, and then we'll get into it. Is that fair? So Dr. Powell is a tenured professor at UNC Chapel Hill School of Global Public Health and at the University of Connecticut. She is a nationally recognized expert and thought leader in masculinities and male health, and is widely recognized for the impact of her work addressing social determinants of health, inequities among boys and men of color. Dr. Powell serves on and leads several national advisory councils on fatherhood and health disparities in boys and men. She is a White House Fellow. She is a Ford Foundation Fellow. She is a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow and an Aspen Institute of Health Innovators Fellow. She currently serves as the Chief Purpose Officer at Headspace, overseeing various portfolios including social impact, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. For those of you who don't know, Headspace's mission is to provide every person access to lifelong mental health support, and through its flagship Headspace app, they have touched over 100 million lives. She is committed to centering racial equity, injustice, and healing in her strategic initiatives to advance health equity among medically underserved populations, and her work has ignited global interest in men's health and health equity initiatives. Join me in welcoming Dr. Wisdom Powell. Have we resolved the sound issue? Can you hear me clearly?
I'm catching you a little bit better now.
Okay, all right, good deal. Well, welcome. So everyone knows me now as Dr. Brewster. They know you as Dr. Powell. So we're friends in real life. Everybody, so we can, the cat's out the bag. We're friends in real life. So for this, can we just be Lou and Wisdom? Yes, okay. So that being said, we'll just jump into it. The title of this session is When We See Them, How We Rise Up to Meet Black Men and Boys in Their Intentions for Radical Healing. And so let's just kind of start off with really getting at what is radical healing. Now, I know Dr. Neville talked about radical healing as being one that requires a collective to heal. But in your words, who is responsible or should be sharing in this work of healing Black men and boys?
So thank you for your question. I'm getting a little echo, so I'm going to talk slowly.
Okay.
What I want to first level set around is what we mean when we talk about radical healing. I think that often when we hear the terminology radical, we think of something outside of the box, and that really is what we're talking about or prescribing here in the psychology of radical healing, which was promulgated and put forth by my colleagues in the Radical Healing Collective. Shout out to all of those wonderful scholars. They set a context and a conceptual framing that helps us move beyond sort of the usual ways that we think about coping and managing both symptomatology and the ecologic threats that confront us all. And when I think about radical healing for boys and men of color in particular, I'm thinking first about the critical ideologies that we need to establish for boys and men to have the sort of narrative foundation to reimagine who they are, where they're from, and what they can ultimately be. when we talk about radical healing, we're also talking about giving people an opportunity to really redress their psychological wounding through efforts to promote more liberation. And that means helping Black men and boys, or standing with them rather, in their quest to self-define themselves, to cultivate a critical consciousness, and the kind of critical consciousness that really both allows them to see themselves more clearly, but also to see the systems that they're navigating more clearly, so that they truly understand the architecture of their discontent. And in the work that I've been doing over my career, one of the principal things that I set out to do in this radical healing movement was to sit with Black men and boys and listen with a third ear deeply to the ways in which they were defining themselves. So much of the literature out in the world at the time that I started this work was all deficit based, and radical healing theologies and frameworks really move us away from these deficit ways of seeing Black men and boys towards one that sees their strengths and assets. And the critical question for me was, what if we saw boys and men of color, particularly Black men and boys, not simply as problems to be solved, but rather as wonders to behold? And what if we started first with their definitions and meanings of manhood, and help them to re-establish for the world and for themselves what it truly means to move through the world through a series of gendered social arrangements? Because most of what we know about the healing work among men and boys has often been done reactively. And what I understood is that Black men were defining on their own terms, what it meant to be healthy and what it meant to be well. And we weren't listening enough to their perspectives in a way that would allow us to center their voices, amplify those perspectives, and treat them as not just lived experience, but as subject matter expertise. So a psychology of radical healing is about also holding systems accountable for the maltreatment and malice that has been inflicted upon communities across time and across history. And so a lot of the earlier radical healing work I was doing was around unpacking notions of medical mistrust and what it truly meant for Black men to move beyond this presumption, if you will, that Black men weren't engaging systems simply because of what happened at Tuskegee during the now infamous study of untreated syphilis among the Negro male. What I understood well, and what Black men were telling me, was that that was not the only wounding that they were experiencing, that there were more proximal experiences with systems that were militating against their natural tendency to be well and to seek radical healing. So for me, radical healing is about establishing a psychology of liberation that grounds us in the knowing that Black men and boys want to heal, grow, and thrive, and it's systems failures that have been at the root of many of the outcomes that we have observed across time and history.
So, Wisdom, do you ever have concern, however, that in this process of healing and getting Black men and boys to realize their full humanness, that we have a safe space for them to do it? Because in some cases, the protective nature that they formed was in response to some trauma that they obviously don't want to endure again. So how do we allow them to realize their full humanness, but still protect them as they go through this journey of being able to express themselves fully?
Well, I think it first starts with honoring the fact that Black men and boys have their own reservoir of strength and resilience, and the capacity for solutioning that we haven't fully brought to the table. I think we should never enter a community, with the presumption that we hold any of the wisdom to help liberate anyone. That first, we have to acknowledge that standing with Black men and boys in their quest for wellness is where we have to situate ourselves. And that's not just about humility, because cultural humility can be feigned. And, we see that all the time in science. People, say I'm culturally humble and I'm bringing a level of cultural competency. This is beyond that. This is about seeing just a full humanity, but the full potential of Black men and boys. And I think that for systems to really wrap their arms around Black men and boys in the ways that we know we need to, they have to first be willing to excavate those bones in the basement that really have kept us from being able to do that work with full integrity. It looks like, the beginning of my work going into barbershops and listening to the narratives of Black men and boys, and allowing them to be the full authors of their own stories, to do as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has called us to disrupt those single stories that we've been telling about Black men and boys for so long. And I think that a science and a practice that is grounded in a knowing that people hold all of the tools and resources that they need, and that our job is to excavate those, is the positionality that we need to bring to any movement for radical healing. That also looks like holding systems accountable in real time, not just retrospectively. In real time, there are harms that are being, propagated by health systems that we need to pay attention to, and that we need to dismantle if boys and men are going to come to systems. One of the most, fascinating findings for me in the work that I've done was learning that Black men from communities around our country who hold high levels of mistrust were holding that level of mistrust because of more proximal experiences with everyday racism, which chips away at your humanity and your sense of trust, and a system's sense of trustworthiness. And to honor that as real truth, the fact that Black men were holding back from health systems wasn't an attitudinal barrier that we needed to fix. It was a systemic one that we needed to fully understand, and to really honor that Black men were making rational choices, having lived through medical malice and maltreatment in real time, contemporarily, that was giving rise to the levels of mistrust that they were feeling. I think if you start from that place, then you're solving for the right problem. You're not fixing attitudes, you're fixing processes of care, so that they're more humane and they speak up to men. More often than not, what I've heard, Lou, is, from men, Black men that I've had the honor of being in community with, is the little things that we do moment to moment, situation to situation in healthcare settings that help men to feel like health systems are designed for them. And I think that when we make an effort to address those contours of care delivery, then we are ultimately supporting Black men in their movement towards more radical healing. We're also supporting them with getting the help and supports that they need early on, before there are more serious consequences for us all to metabolize or to manage.
So you've done the bulk of your work as a very accomplished researcher. You've worked, in the public sector. Now you've shifted to the private sector. How has that process changed the way you do your work? How do you get private companies to dedicate resources and collaborate with the public sector on these very non-traditional things, I would imagine, for a private sector entity to work in? Talk to us a little about what that looks like.
Well, one of the things we know is that private sector entities have something that public institutions lack, and that is the ability to do things at scale with a level of rapidity that is not always possible in bureaucratic systems like in the public sector. But public sector have proximity to the people and to the promise. And when you combine both the private sector capacity to deliver rapidly, to deliver interventions, with the public sector's proximity, and then you have what the makings of a collective impact model that helps us all win. And I've always thought that, we all saw, for example, during COVID-19, that, the fault lines between those systems were revealed, right? We got to see that no one system, ecosystem, or sector was going to solve this wicked problem alone. And it was in that moment, on our knees, as COVID was bearing down on us, that we began to see the power of cooperation. In the private sector, we call that co-epetition, where we collaborate and we combine funds and resources in ways that allow us to address those problems in tandem. And I think that if we were to, and this is my call to action for private sector leaders,
to really imagine that, in the same ways that we want to create accountable communities for health, that we need to be creating accountable corporations for health. If you're doing business in a geographic region that is in a care desert, where there's limited transportation, poor, water and air quality, and there are other sort of environmental, disadvantages that are present, that you have a moral obligation, an ethical duty to do something about it. You can't just drop your business from the sky and keep it moving. Private sector entities have a responsibility, and they also have access to capital that can help move the needle on some of these challenges in more rapid ways. But they need the wisdom of public sector institutions, of universities, of theorists, of scientists, leaders like the ones that are present in the room today, to help them to figure out where they might direct those resources to achieve the best impact. And so in my mind, private sector leaders have, especially now, a tremendous opportunity to lean in ways to dismantle the disparities that we see and to advance mental health equity, to do, as Dr. Dawes has taught us, to address those exorbitant excess costs that we're paying as a result of not resolving mental health inequities. You're not going to have a viable workforce if everyone is sick and tired. And so to see the problem not just as something out there for others to solve, but one that we all should tackle together, is the shift ideologically that private sector leaders have to make. And it's really encouraging to see leaders doing that and stepping up to the plate in ways to advance health equity for both their members and partners and clients, but also for the surrounding geographies where there are higher social vulnerability.
So yeah, I mean, it's incredible what you've been able to do at Headspace. If you have a moment, I would love for you to share some of the work what I think is incredible work you've done in Connecticut as far as increasing access to Headspace's tool for individuals who live there. And then obviously you can share, the special gift you have for us here today for people who are watching you today.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things that led me out of academia, from the cushy, sexy world of academia into the private sector, was this opportunity to do work at scale. And I've shared this personal story both in my testimony before the House Committee on Ways and Means, but I'll share it again here in brief to let you know that the decisions that we make about our career, those of us who are working on the front lines of radical healing, are never based on what we truly need, because I could have stayed very comfortably in my tenured professorship. But what became clear to me during the pandemic, as I was getting calls from mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and aunties and uncles about members of their family who were suffering during the COVID-19 crisis. My own niece had a psychotic break during the COVID-19 pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, when all the systems were ago, but being completely overwhelmed by the volume of people that were coming in. And it became clear to me that I needed to move beyond the walls of academia out into the world to do this work in ways that would truly touch people. And so I brought that energy to Headspace with an idea that if we were truly interested in doing something that was going to ignite radical healing, that we had to do something different. And in the city of Hartford, they were confronting significant levels of community violence, often at the hands of young men of color, and also many of the victims of community violence in the city of Hartford were young men of color. And it became clear to me that we could do something differently if we were to remove some of the access barriers to just preventive self-care, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so we partnered with the city of Hartford and the mayor there to introduce the first of its kind of a public-private partnership in the city of Hartford to create a movement for a mindful city. We understood that to do this work, we couldn't just work one Black male at a time, one young person at a time, that this work needed to be intergenerational, and that we needed to really establish systems for sustainability that would be grounded in the community, so that when we left the community, that they would be better off. So now anyone who lives, works, or gets educated in the city of Hartford has free access to Headspace. And we're combining that access with on the ground activations, and culturally responsive content guides to help people see themselves in the product and content. One of the things I'm most proud of at Headspace was helping them to develop a whole content library around durable legacy that helps Black men and boys and women and girls and communities navigate social injustice, metabolize the stress that they've been experiencing, and cultivate joy. And to me, that's the work of radical healing, combining cross-sectoral solutions, marrying those with private sector capital, and unlocking access to a whole community so that we can ignite a movement for collective healing. That is what radical healing looks like on the ground.
That is incredible. Also, you've provided access to Headspace, the Headspace app for everyone. Do you want to talk about that access point you provided for participants today?
Absolutely. We wanted to make sure that we provided all of you with a little taste of what Headspace has to offer. And so everyone who's attending today will have access to our product and content library. And we look forward to hearing from you, because the other thing that we leverage pretty principally at Headspace is human-centered design. And we want to make sure that the solutions and the content and products that we're developing really speak to your wounds. So please don't just use the product, but give us your feedback about what you're experiencing so that we can make it better and we can meet you where you are.
I want to make special note, make sure you get the code at the bottom, because the QR is not useful if you don't have the GS Black Male Health Summit code to enter once you get to it. So when you scan, you're going to come to a site, and it's going to ask you to fill in that word, GS Black Male Health Summit, in that box so that you can fully access the app. That'll be live until, I think it's, December 2024. So I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of it. So Wisdom, always like to live on positive note, even when we are socializing. So we're going to give you that opportunity to do that today. All right. So you've already educated us that Black men are not hardwired to deny emotional pain, to self-medicate, to not seek mental health assistance when they need it. What are Black men and Black boys? Who are they?
You know, I always believe that we should never serve a community or do work with community members who we don't radically love. And it's my love, and as my mother would say, agape love, that brings me to this particular issue and challenge. As many of you who have followed my work know, I've talked a lot about my grandfather, who sits with me, behind me every day. And when I think about his legacy as a single Black father, a Korean War veteran, and an advocate for justice and healing, and I think about also the fact that he perished prematurely from a cancer that we could have prevented if he had told someone about his troubles. And so for me, Black men are wonders to behold. Black men are the foundations of our communities, as are Black women. There's no competition there. We have come here to work side by side, and we have work to do that can only be done collectively. So the way I think about my work as a woman of color in this space is one that's grounded in a vision for a collective community that whereby Black men get to stand on the principles that ground them in their authenticity, and Black women work side by side with them in the quest for radical healing and liberation. In my mind, Black men are talent that is waiting for the world to unleash. And Black men are wonders truly to behold. And so the work for me in this space is really designed to help just be a vessel for that narrative, to disrupt those single stories, to create systems and processes of care that truly rise up to meet men in their fullest humanity. And that is the work of psychological liberation.
Thank you. Thank you. So, do we have time for one question? Or yes? Okay. Okay. Yes. If you have questions, please write them down on the card that's on the table, and we will. I see some. So I'm going to jump into one question, Wisdom, and then then we'll get some more from the audience. You know I got to put my glasses on, old man Lou. I don't know what I'm trying. This
Same.
doesn't work, right?
You're
There,
in, you're
there
in
you
good
go,
company.
right? Okay. How can black men unify to share the information that is most valuable to our community? So,
Can you repeat that for me?
so how can black men unify to share the information that is most valuable to our community? So, in some ways, how can black men be agents or actors of radical healing for themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, Black men and boys are agents of their own radical healing. In every community space, every barbershop in the 1990s, when I was at my clipboard and in barbershops, it was Black men who were leading the charge and they were setting the tone. And so the first thing to realize is that there is no science of Black men without Black men. There's no practice of radical healing about Black men without Black men. And I think that one of the ways that I see Black men leaning into this space from every space that they may occupy is getting involved in this movement and making sure that you are one, becoming, making yourself more visible in the communities and spaces where you already are. Like the proximity that you have in your community right now to other Black men is gold. And being a messenger, a trusted messenger for preventive screening. Most of the studies that I've published have found that when Black men tell other Black men or encourage Black men to get primary preventive screening, those Black men are more likely to go. So check on your strong, stoic, and silent friends. Encourage them to express what is troubling them. Provide a brave space for them to lay those troubles down and be one of the ones who encourage them to be a man about their health by seeking the help that they need early so that they can be around for their families and communities. We need you. You're valuable to us in the community, but you're valuable to the world. So that to me feels like the most immediate way that Black men can lean in this moment and support us in this movement. And if you're on the training trajectory, consider careers in public health and nursing and all of those other caring professions where we have a limited number of Black men represented in those professions. There are so many other Black men out there who would just value being able to pick up the phone and call a therapist or a psychiatrist or social worker or counselor who looks like you. Don't underestimate the value of who you are without doing anything in this space, what you would bring. There's power in being able to see you in these spaces.
So this is one from the audience, and this one kind of struck me, so I wanted to get your input on this one. What are key priorities for building ecosystems of support for gay, bi, queer, and trans men and boys? So I guess so I would kind of rephrase it as
that would help me a lot because I don't think I'm hearing you well. If someone could type that question in the chat, that would be awesome. If you could repeat it again, Luther.
I'm going to repeat it one more time for you. So what are the key priorities for building ecosystems of support for gay, bi, queer, and trans men and boys?
I heard the ending of that, but not the beginning. So I guess I'm going to wait for someone to type that in for me.
Is someone typing it in the chat? Is someone typing it in the chat? Yeah? Okay. Do they need me? Yeah, I was going to say, they can just.
I mean, I heard sort of the end, and I know you were asking about queer and LGBTQ, or queer and transgendered men, I think I heard you say at the end, but I didn't hear the beginning part of the question. And while I'm waiting, what are the key priorities for building an ecosystem for queer and transgender men? Was that the question?
Correct. That's it, exactly.
Okay, for the support. Well, first of all, I mean, we are in Pride Month, which also happens to be Men's Health Month. And I think this is a moment for all of us to educate ourselves, first of all, about the range of need and also challenge that community in particular are facing. I mean, the level of violence and senseless murders that are happening in the community right now are both preventable and don't represent the best of who we can be as human beings. And so I think that the first priority for me is, first of all, making sure that we have a humanizing narrative about men from transgender and queer communities, so that we can begin to see them in the fullness of their humanity. Similarly to the work that I was doing at the beginning of my career around building a new narrative around Black masculinities, I think that even in that narrative, there's room for us to sort of really expand the aperture to understand, to gain a better understanding of how queer and transgender men define themselves on those multiple axes of identity. It requires us, first of all, as ecosystems, to adopt an intersectional lens. I mean, when we talk about sometimes Black male health, we're often not talking about men from those communities, and we should be, because though the health priorities of men in those communities we have a shared responsibility, and we all have a shared burden for when men in those communities perish. The level of men who perish from conditions in queer and transgender communities that we can prevent are like mind-blowing. Think about the behavioral health challenges, for example, that we see a heightened risk for in that community. So I think first we need to establish a new narrative. We need to also interrogate the policies and systems and structures, and to ensure that those processes of care are built with men in those communities in mind, and so that we're also taking care of everyone in the community equitably. There isn't any room in our community for the type of division that we often see when we try to treat men in these siloed groups. All men are men.
So we have one we loaded up in the chat for you. For those of you who
I see it.
can't
Thank
see
you
it.
for this question. Yeah, how can Black women support racial healing of their sons and partners without losing themselves and sacrificing their own racial healing? This is a loaded question, and I think we need a whole session on this. So let me just say that one of the things that I'm often encouraging us to do in the community writ large, particularly on the quest for radical healing, because remember, radical healing is also about addressing identity-based wounds that come at us as a result of racism and systemic oppression, which we all feel, and we share the burden. And often what happens is that we cape for each other in ways that militate against our own self-care. So we have to start giving from the overflow. And one of the ways that Black women can support the racial healing of their sons and partners first is by educating themselves about the range of cultural norms and stereotypes that confront men and boys, to ensure that we're not actually reinforcing them in the ways that we raise our sons and the expectations we set for our partners. I've been on many of the playgrounds, and I've heard a Black woman say to a boy, "Walk it off, come on, big man, don't cry, stop it." Like, we have to hold space for the full range of Black men and boys, for their humanity, so that we can learn to hold space for our own. Because Black women have their own superwoman schemas, which are grounded in these notions, false notions of strength and resilience that militate against our sensibilities to seek help. We have every right to feel grief, pain, and sorrow. We are not hardwired to resist pain, despite what Dr. Samuel Cartwright taught us way back when. We are not better prepared and better capable of withstanding insurmountable pain. And the more we are able to do that, the less we'll lose ourselves, and the less we'll sacrifice our own racial healing. Our boys cannot be what they don't see. And that's not just seeing steel sharpening steel. Like, they learn from the women in their lives too, about how to negotiate their interior lives. And we should model for them how to do that when we are willing to be strategically vulnerable, when we're willing to take off the capes and masks. And we also have to be willing to be in partnerships with men in ways, and I'm not talking about submission in the ways that we, some folks might think biblically. I'm talking about understanding that being in partnership is a spiritual test, that there is something about being in relation with another human being that requires you to hold space for their pain. How many times have you asked your partner, how they're doing really, really. And how many times are you willing to hold space for that pain without judging them unintentionally for the wounding that they're experiencing? And I think that we have to develop our own capacity to withstand and be able to be in company with men who are wounded, so that our sons and partners can appreciate that they do have that place where they can be brave and authentic about the interior struggles that they're negotiating.
You know,
We
Wisdom,
can heal in proximity of one another, by the way.
you know, Wisdom, listening to you, I have come to a realization that I have been severely underutilizing you in my marriage. I am going to have Cheryl call you so that you can read back to her. Oh, Cheryl's my wife. All of this, and tell her about my pain, and tell her about how she should be treating me. Okay, so everyone here is on notice that she spoke to my pain, and I don't know if I'm getting all these things you're talking about. So I'm gonna hold you to this. Don't switch it up when you get around your girl. Okay, I want this same energy. I want this same energy when you talk to my wife. Okay, don't go over here.
I got
Stay
you.
right here. Okay, all right. Well, please, everyone, join me in thanking Dr. Wisdom Powell for her time. Thank you so much.
It's been an honor to be with you, and thank you for bearing through the technical difficulties. It would have been my esteemed pleasure and honor to be with you today were it not for another speaking engagement. I wish you a wonderful rest of your conference, and I wish everyone in the room radical healing and radical freedom and liberation.
Take care, sis.